is the most economical option. Understanding that the city does participate in a fleet program and understanding that these utility vehicles may not need to be outfit in full emergency mode, we saw it as an opportunity to consider pursuing inclusion in that program. So our request is for 3 utility vehicles. The capacity, they will serve as a primary fire inspection vehicle. A second one will serve as a general utility part-time fire inspection vehicle. And the third would serve as a general utility vehicle with an emphasis on availability to administrative staff. The reason for that request is my Assistant Chief of Administration, Mike Havey, has responsibility for our inspection programming, including occupancy inspections and construction site inspections. We'd like to have a utility vehicle available to him as opposed to using his personal vehicle on job sites. Our training chief has a responsibility for the training both on department premises and off premises, which often requires the transport of specific equipment. Again, as opposed to using your personal vehicle to transport fire equipment, heavy equipment to these scenes, we'd like to have a utility vehicle available that they could coordinate between for those movements. Be happy to answer any questions related to that.
Mike, talk about these vehicles. Can you lease these vehicles or do you want to buy them?
So projecting ahead a little bit, there are specific utility vehicles that are going to need to be outfit with emergency equipment, lights, sirens, and radio systems. Next year, we're going to be moving forward with a replacement plan for Battalion 18. That's a 10-year-old Tahoe. If we are successful with that, the existing Battalion 18 would move to backup role, and we would be able to decommission that Tahoe that's in its role currently. Our pickup trucks serve a very specific role within our organization, including transport to emergency scenes and back. So they would need to be outfit with that equipment. We would prefer to purchase those vehicles because they're a bit of a more specialty piece of equipment. When we look at inspection, utility vehicles for the chiefs and part-time inspectors, we see an opportunity to go without that emergency add-ons to it, and we think the leasing might provide us an option we'd like to try out at a lower cost than purchasing those vehicles outright.
So you would like to purchase 3 vehicles, correct?
As part of this request, it would be the lease of
Yes.
3 vehicles.
And then the other 2 vehicles that you're talking about, are they equipped the same as the others? With lights and siren and so forth?
Our pickup trucks,
Yeah.
yes. Those are emergency vehicles, yes. Battalion 18 and our 2 pickup trucks are both emergency vehicles.
So just to jump in, if I may, this is one of the rare line items that was not funded. We had some questions about it, not the merits of the chief's needs here or anything like that, but the leasing option on this. We view this as what's the all-in cost, and it's in the staff report or the CIP request. This isn't a $13,000 request or a $20,000 request. I viewed this looking at it as a $52,000, $53,000 request beginning in 2025 because that's what these vehicles would cost. So if you look at our leasing program, we have 32 vehicles on our leasing program, and we've consistently stayed under our $200,000 budget annually. These 5 vehicles would be $53,000. So 5 vehicles would be a quarter of our leasing budget. And we have 32 other vehicles keeping us under the 200,000. So that's the way we viewed this. But I think there is a little bit of a menu for the board to consider in that staff report as well, if you want to have some discussion about that. I kind of viewed it as all in. The math didn't seem, we wanted to do some more investigation. And I would also add, if you you decide not to go forward with this at this time, we will continue to look at how that fits into the leasing program, because again, we've been continually under budget, under our $200,000 budget. So we can approach the Common Council at any point in time where it makes sense to pull the trigger on, 1, 2, or 5 of these requested vehicles. That's kind of the approach, and I wanted to give you some context there.
Thoughts, anyone? Lisa?
Andrew or Mike, the difference in the per item is what, the selection of vehicle, or what is the delta on why these three would be so incremental to the leasing cost versus what we typically do?
Matt Treb and Chief Kresick really worked on that, but certainly you got to look at the cost of outfitting the vehicles as well. That's 17.5-ish for each of those. So that's a big deal.
I would offer that our first request was 3 vehicles that would not be outfit with emergency capabilities. The alternate, as Andrew has spoken to, was 5 vehicles with 3 of those outfit with emergency capabilities.
Should Assistant Chief Havey be going to construction sites in his own vehicle? Probably not. So that's where the menu comes in that you guys can give some direction on.
I'm a little confused by this, Andrew. I didn't actually notice it before that you actually didn't recommend funding of this. Would we in favor of funding 3 under the lease program and alternative plans for the other 2 which need rig outs, or what's the story?
And I think I've created some confusion related to this request, and I'll try to add some clarity to it.
I think it was just when you added in the other 2 vehicles
think
in the following year, but that's where you lost me.
So what we are looking to do, there's 2 alternates that were in our request. The first is 3 leased vehicles, based on the criteria we talked about. One would be the fire inspection vehicle, one would be a part-time fire
Would that be an
inspection
Oak Creek
vehicle.
white, or they be red, or?
They would be the color that would be provided through the leasing service. We would not provide any specialty colors to them. We would use magnetic adhesive signs to it. They would not have emergency capabilities. That is our primary request. Our alternate request was built on a model that was to provide our 3 administrative chiefs, with emergency vehicles as opposed to utilizing their private vehicles. Understanding the cost associated with that when we had our CIP discussion ahead of this, our alternate request is our primary request. The 3 leased vehicles, not outfit with emergency capabilities.
I would be in favor of that.
Next year's request is Battalion 18. We don't talk about Battalion 18 in this. This is purely utility vehicles. So I don't want to be disingenuous with that, but next year will be an emergency vehicle discussion with Battalion 18.
Okay, so this year we're talking, the focus should be on the 3 potential for the lease
Right.
program. So what is the cost of that?
Looks like 37,000. Am I right?
So for 3 Nissan Pathfinders, and the reason we selected the Nissan Pathfinders was based on the correspondence with Enterprise, availability and price, and capability to carry equipment. The initial for year 1 was 12,662, which would then jump up to 25,324 year 2025 and later.
Program?
The first year, there was lease and equity remaining in that account.
This is really all in addition to the $200,000.
Other than that, other than the leasing program, how do we intend to fund the vehicle replacements no matter what? Assuming they need to be done. So how are we looking at that?
So good point. So there's certain vehicles that we can't even lease. So that's a great question. How do we handle maybe the Tahoe with all special rigged out for emergencies and things that wouldn't be befitting of the leasing program? That would come under your $1 million We Energies cash. And if you look, and maybe we should have explained all of these funding sources and the fund balance, if you flip your spreadsheet over, you can see the way we fit this puzzle together. We have more than $1 million, newsflash, we have more than $1 million worth of requests in our annual CIP budget from the departments every single year. I think we had funded like $20 million of projects last year. We use a variety of funding sources for that. The council has been very, very good about establishing reserve funds for items such as building reserve to fund maintenance and bigger maintenance items on our buildings as needed, as well as our equipment replacement fund. So if we were to say we want to add $25,000 to the leasing line item, we would be overdrawn on our $1 million of cash, because as you can see, we've spent that to the tune of $999,160, just $1 million. So if you hit the balloon, it comes out the other end, right? So we got to find a way to handle that displacement. If we added 25,000 to the 200,000, we would of course need to fund 25,000 in some other funding source, or cut a project out to the tune of about $25,000.
But what
So-
did we intend to do? How are we paying for these 5 vehicles? It's probably $150,000 cash. How are we going to deal with that?
So we'll look at it as an example that's in here today. So the DPW requested let me find it here, $326,000 front end loader replacement. Went to the drawing board. The staff saw the merit for that project, that piece of equipment. We funded that with $100,000 of We Energies money, and we used $216,000 of our equipment reserve. We would go through that same calculus if we had a vehicle that wasn't befitting of the leasing program. It wouldn't fit in that 200, maybe or whatever is added to that line item. We would go through and say, well, if that's the need, that vehicle needs to be funded gets a pole position with $1 million of We Energy money. Or we can maybe look at our reserve and 50-50 it, or however
are
we.
we just making a qualitative call that these are not due for replacement? Or what's the story? I don't know why we don't have any funding here if they're needed. I don't
So I would
understand.
even back up to the previous, the self-contained breathing, obviously it has to be done for $500,000. What if we don't get a grant? Where's that funding coming from?
$500,000, that's something definitely.
That's a lot more than a few trucks.
So we have, and you two have talked about this at length, but just the strategy you're right. If we don't get grant funding, we have to buy the equipment. We know that.
Get partial grant fund
They'll
to come up with the balance.
they'll tell you how. But we have actually two shots at this grant. So we have it this year, this fall. We should be getting some notification, yay or nay, unless
We
you
hope,
already did.
yes. We have not received notification.
And then we also have next year. So we didn't want to say 500,000 of our million is reserved just in case we don't get this grant and none of these other projects can be funded. We know that it's not a really discretionary call to get the new SCBA. So we'll have to have that conversation, and there's been a couple options that these gentlemen have put forward to say, if we do need to pull the trigger and we don't get that grant funding, we have some options, including partially in the 2025 budget if needed. So it's more of a placeholder, if you will. That make sense? No?
current vehicles are owned, correct?
The current vehicles were obtained through the police department, so yes,
But owned, they're not a lease passover.
correct.
I think we should look at a way to somehow get what they need, at least the 3 Pathfinders, so.
Well, it begs the question, is it a want or is it a need? So have we not justified the fact that they're due, or
Well, I think maybe the challenge is that, I guess the best way I'd describe it, there isn't really a comprehensive replacement plan for vehicles in the city. You know, we have DPW, they're on the lease program. Any other non-DPW vehicle is a former patrol officer.
But doesn't leasing these 3 vehicles now put it on
Correct.
to a cycle because they're going to come off lease eventually, as opposed to what we have now, which is owned?
Correct. And, you know, historically, we didn't have a comprehensive replacement cycle because we were able to take the police vehicles and they were still in adequate condition to then utilize them either for civic center staff or for the fire department. You know, what we've just seen in the last 2 to 3 years is that, you know, the wear and tear on the police patrol vehicles is much greater, so they aren't going to serve a need probably after they retire. So this is going to be a continuing challenge, and it's just not for the fire department. We have vehicles downstairs that are literally falling apart, and we don't have a really good replacement plan right now. And as you can see, if you only have a capital budget of $1 million, and this becomes a reoccurring 300 or 400 grand, it's going to be really hard to meet the other organizational needs if you're spending 40% of it on, or 30% of it just on vehicles.
Which wouldn't be that obtuse, because if you look at we've had great success with our leasing program. We've turned over 2 years ago we looked at this. We had our average age of our vehicles go from 2004 to 2018 or some ridiculous statistic like that. The other option is cash funding these vehicles. And in order to turn over 32 vehicles in a period of 5 years, or 4.5, 5 years we've been on the leasing program, would have been, I mean, just divide out a 1-ton pickup truck and multiply it by turning 5 or 6 of them over every year. That's more than $200,000, and we've turned over 32. So it's cash funding it, which we didn't have the capacity to do to an adequate level. We were really taking care of our needs and dividing our fleet and the lifespan of those fleet vehicles up and saying, hey, we're getting rid of these vehicles every 8 years because after that they really go downhill, or whatever the metric is. And we entered into this leasing program for our light duty fleet. These are great candidates. Specifically, the 3 that don't need to be outfitted are probably good candidates for the leasing program, because we will sell them. We buy very, very low, the government rate, and we've made money after driving vehicles for 2 years on the resale of these because of the buying power of the government contract. We had the early on example was we had a 3-year 1-ton pickup truck, and the total cost of ownership was $1,300 after we sold it. So that's the power of the government lease and the equity program that we're in. If you wanted to fund these Nissan Pathfinders, what I would do is probably, if that's a goal, we would probably increase the lease vehicle line item by $15,000, and we would move the fitness equipment purchase over to cash on hand with the equipment replacement fund. And kind of that's where the puzzle pieces could fit if you wanted to do that.
Alderman Gale, I didn't answer your question though. Is this a need or a want? I need a new inspection vehicle. That's a daily driver. That vehicle is projected to have some significant maintenance costs next year. We need to replace that vehicle. I need a utility vehicle to serve for a part-time inspector and other activities around the station. We don't have a vehicle to serve in that capacity at this time. That third vehicle to serve for the chiefs, for Assistant Chief Havey and Assistant Chief Olson for job site visits and the movement of equipment. I will tell you, I need that vehicle for them because I'm done with them carrying their equipment in their private vehicles. That could certainly be open up to discussion on need versus want. I would tell you we need that vehicle.
I'd rather not waste a whole half an hour discussing $15,000 of capital. I think what Andrew suggested maybe is probably serviceable in terms of budgetary situations.
Know that next year that 13,000 isn't 13,000.
Yeah. But it's rather than it's not 150,000 or 200,000.
Fund, I mean, maybe this goes with.
Do we not want these vehicles in the lease program? Should we fund it through a different source? Should we fund it out of? But it's a capital item, so it's obviously through CIP.
The way you would probably do this, and again, I didn't recommend this. I think it needed more study. I looked at it as the full boat request of 53,000, and 5 vehicles being a quarter of our $200,000 budget when we have 32 vehicles on our $200,000 budget now.
Two of them seem
At
to
the
be
surface
standalone.
level, that didn't make sense to me somehow. I wasn't comfortable recommending that we do that until we further investigate that. Through further discussion with the chief in his presentation today, it seems like you do have a menu available to you that I wasn't really appreciating when we were reviewing these budget requests. If you wanted to do the 3, we offered an opportunity for you to do that. Taking another 15,000 out of the equipment reserve is not, going to be a big deal.
Sake of clarity,
Yeah.
But the drawback of that then is you're reserving additional capacity of your million every year moving forward, which you're going to have to, if we were to buy these vehicles, what would be ideal? We would have we would be cash funding their depreciation. So we had cash sitting there when we needed to displace them and get new. So you're accomplishing a vehicle replacement schedule for these vehicles
Well,
regardless.
considering
But
the old
money,
replacement schedule went away because the cops, their vehicles are not reusable apparently at this point in time where historically they've been. So we have to actually create something new.
I think the old squad car thing is a lot of communities do that, right? And more people are leasing vehicles and not doing that any longer. I mean, we were one of the first major municipalities to do this vehicle leasing. This is validating to me. We got the slide deck. I carried this thought process on from Jerry Peterson. So he had the conversations for 2 or 3 years before I got here. And we had this slide deck and there were like 4 customers in Wisconsin. Now there's like 40. So everybody's done this math and we were just an early adopter of this. You don't do the right thing and have any rational basis for cash funding your vehicles. You borrow for your vehicles or you lease. And this has been a good opportunity for us. We can squeeze these 3 in, knowing the full cost in 25 is 25,000, and we have reserved that capacity moving forward out of the $1 million. So we're
Vehicle. And
They resell them, Bob. They take them back and they actually resell them. So that's where we get our equity back.
right.
They're not available to us to actually reuse.
we don't take the lease to term and or buy it out because we sell the vehicles using Enterprise as our fleet consultant at the appropriate time where we can get the highest dollar and the lowest cost of ownership, and
I
it
guess
folds
I was
back
just-
into the
I
fund.
was just floating out if there's an option there to be able to more efficiently provide the other 2 vehicles he's looking for in the future.
Instead of
using that
reserving the
route.
capacity every year
Right.
moving forward.
Because then you can pick and choose which vehicles you have in your fleet that you know how they've been maintained.
And we wanna
low
own 'em.
miles.
We want to own them then, right? That's
Right.
what you're saying. Yep. That's a good thought.
Yeah, there's a big strategy to them in terms of when they actually take a vehicle back and resell it. They don't take them to term sometimes, so,
But there,
yeah.
on our side, that if we come to make,
I'm not sure if we have that option or not, but. So, I don't know,
I say go with the 3 inspection vehicles.
we have to do
Leave-
the two other ones next year.
Yeah, I think that's open
And,
for.
and we're not foreclosing on that thought that you had by
Right.
doing that. I
No,
mean, we can,
and
we'll
that's what I'm saying,
analyze
it's
that.
something to open up and take a look at.
Yeah.
It's an option.
Okay, got
Right.
that? Good, Mike?
You
Thank
get
you.
that,
Thank you.
get that in there? Okay.
Anything else for fire?
Oh, thank you.
Next item for discussion is the next gen 911 system for dispatch. Our request was for $83,000. You'll see it's not funded in the capital project. When we talked about it with police department and IT, it appears that it was a reoccurring $83,000 for a 5-year contract with AT&T. We shifted that money to the dispatch operating budget so that our partners can pay a portion of that cost. So it is being funded. It's being funded out of the operating budget. Again, we didn't want to add $83,000 of reoccurring costs on $1 million worth of capital. So we're going to accommodate it in the operating budget. But Chief can certainly explain as to what Next Gen 911 is and why it's a benefit.
Sure, good morning. So Next Gen 911, we've been working on getting that set over the last several years. We've come to council and got a few of those items going, and part of that is with the cell network, taking our own 911 cell phone calls, but currently what we have when we get a 911 call is it triangulates it off of whatever towers are going on. Gives us an area, not always the best area. Sometimes when we have a 911 drop, it's the tower. Well, as some of you know, towers can reach out about 10 miles on a cell phone signal, depending on what your best connection is. So going to the next step on that is actually using the same exact information in GPS location that Uber does or any of the other current things that are out there that can show exactly where you are within feet. So getting people help immediately to where they are instead of going, we've got a 911 call and it's somewhere in this possible area, gets both police and fire there as soon as possible. So that is the next step. That's what we're rolling towards. And the state of Wisconsin has partnered with AT&T to get that all completed. So our biggest thing is we have to do this going forward. Our current platform that we have for dealing with this is at end of life. It was about a 5 to maybe 7 years. We're at 7 years, so we need to get that completed as we go technically into year 8 here with that information and equipment. The bigger part that we're looking at is now everyone's going to subscription-based items or leasing type things. So working with IT to look at what our best option was, we came to the conclusion that currently right now, the 5-year plan to go with that and get it every year at the $82,000 was our best option. When we started looking at the best way to deal with this through the budget, we did submit it as a CIP, but as already explained, it was better rolled into the operating budget because this is something that we're gonna have to do for the foreseeable future. And with anyone else that we're partnered with for dispatch services, they are going to pay their portion of it as well. So Oak Creek is not technically on the hook for the $82,000, it'll be our portion moving forward.
We're obviously gonna write escalators into those because those costs never go down.
So that right now, we're working on completing that IGA with St. Francis, who we've been in with the last 9 years. Next year will be the last year of their contract.
Been that long already?
It has been that long. So what we're doing is working on percentage rates of actual use. So they'll be impacted by what their actual use is on that versus what our actual use. And then if we have anyone else that comes on after that as well, their percentage of that actual use. So if we have another party come on in the near future, that'll obviously be somewhere where we can benefit from because we're going to split that 82 several ways instead of just one way for us.
David, I'm sorry, I have to claim ignorance. I've forgotten if I read it. Does Milwaukee County use this system too?
Milwaukee County, everyone's going to have to go to this soon. So everyone's on the
So
forefront of
we're
going
not
to
gonna
it.
face the fact where Milwaukee's gonna mandate
Correct. And we're not beholden to what Milwaukee County says.
Just quick question. So on the, when I'm looking at the, Max's, sheet, it doesn't show funded on here, but it is funded?
It's funded in the operating budget, not in the capital budget.
Gotcha. Thank you very
For
much.
dispatch.
Yeah, a lot of what we were seeing, especially on the software side, is they're doing more capital leases. So, you know, when Tom and I talked about it while Chief was out of the office, it was either $83,000 a year for 5 years, and we would have a reoccurring item in our capital budget, or it's about $40,000 for the service, but then it's several $100,000 to purchase all the equipment. So we're essentially kind of leasing some of that equipment as part of it, and that's why it's $83,000.
Okay.
A lot more sustainable for us to plan than trying to just do a subscription and then purchase all of our own hardware.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you.
Better carry your vehicles, it'd be appreciated.
So I guess I can give you a quick snapshot on that. You know, Oak Creek's 28.4 square miles. Going call to call in a shift. When I was still on the road, I would average 120 miles a shift. Unfortunately, when call volume goes up, so does those miles. And as Matt can explain, our road miles have gone up for what we have in Oak Creek. So we're averaging in 3 years, that's a rotation, 170,000 plus on a squad. So when we're done with it, you know, part of what we use as well is those become our training vehicles and other admin vehicles. We're getting to a point where we don't have the extras for the rest of the city, and to a point we're struggling to even have our own backups for that plan. So if we could, I wish we would. And when we looked at leasing, unfortunately, leasing for the police department and what we're doing, it was over twice what our yearly operating budget is for owning. Correct. So it just wasn't worth it, but we did look into it.
Not accelerate
We can
so
stop going to
fast.
calls.
You know.
Right.
That's not the answer.
No.
No.
Thank you.
That one.
Yeah.
So, in our strategic action plan, I won't waste your time trying to cite the exact item, but we have really objectives and goals to clarify and make policy determinations on how we want to handle sidewalk funding, sidewalk replacement and maintenance funding in the community. We have an ordinance right now that requires the community or the citizens themselves to bear, the brunt of that cost, and it's some formula. If it's 15 years or older, it's this percent, and if it's younger, if it's younger, I guess, it's X minus 1%. This is really an opportunity here to have some funds set aside every year to allow us to accumulate maybe over a 2 or a 3 year cycle to go and let one larger sidewalk maintenance project. This is really a conversation starter for this board and for the council, because the policy changes do need to be made after this if we do kind of adopt this strategy. Really the strategy is we're not looking to special assess the residents for their individual cake. Did you know it was called a cake? One rectangle. The joke hit in a better in a different audience, but it is a cake. The resident calls up, hey, I have a trip hazard in front, or we do a larger maintenance project. Traditionally, not lately, but historically, we've gone through a special assessment process, which means special assessment hearings for their common council to say, hey.
Very historic, because that hasn't been done since I've been.
So, and it's still on the books.
Is it?
So we do need, as part of our infrastructure, attention to our sidewalks and trails, but we don't think that's the way, and really this is to begin that conversation. I guess you've been here since, do you remember a special assessment hearing for sidewalks, Matt? I know Sullivan would.
They were prior to me coming here, so it was almost 20 years ago. 20
Although
plus
we did-
years ago.
We did used to have a line item for sidewalk replacement every
We did. We were
100 grand or something?
75,000 a year, and we were doing projects every 2 years. We do about $150,000 project, which would cover about a quarter of the city. We did that for approximately 10 years and covered the entire city, and then we stopped funding that program. But yeah, just for reference, 60,000 doesn't get you very far. To redo an intersection for crosswalk ramps, which we find a large portion of our trip hazards, is about anywhere $15,000 to $20,000 just to do one intersection to get it up to par. So I can't speak for Matt, but I believe we probably run into requests for trip hazards weekly, whether that's one or two, but it is a weekly thing throughout the summer where we go out and mark them, and it's usually due to tree roots or any kind of settling at the ramps intersections. So they do need to be taken care of. That is part of the American Disability Act. So this does need to be brought forward, as Andrew said, for discussion.
I look at it too, as a community that we've, I think, emphasized the connectivity. We have some notable stupid gaps in our sidewalk system that don't make any sense, that should be finished. This is the way to get after some of those.
And too, that specific thing is acknowledged in our strategic plan, so that's going to be front and center and discussed. This was really just, I don't recall a budget. I think this is my 7th budget or 6th budget. I don't recall ever having a recurring line item for sidewalk maintenance. So that's been even, 8 or 10 years or more that we even had that at. So.
Street, yeah, I know that he wasn't big on tree replacements either, so that got slashed and burned. Well, the trees, he probably thought the trees are causing the sidewalk heaves, so it would kill 2 birds with 1 stone. No terrace trees and no sidewalk problems. So. Both budget items. Anyway, I digress. What?
I was just wondering, what's typical nowadays for municipalities? The special assessments or?
Ugh.
Well, if the city's tree is causing sidewalk heave, that should be our problem, right? It's easy to do, but is that logical?
No, I'm not saying.
I don't recall that we've ever special assessed a sidewalk in my tenure.
Just
here,
thinking
so.
about what. The problem is at intersections. Who owns that? That's the city, right?
Yeah,
Right, but if that's where the primary problem typically is for sidewalks, is the handicap ramps at intersections, we're paying for it anyways. So if we change the policy for special assessments, that number won't be sufficient to cover.
This is insufficient. Just
Right,
coming
but-
into this, we know
but
it's insufficient.
To replace homeowners to add sidewalk, I mean, this isn't gonna do anything because the main problem is intersections. Those are ours anyways.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, and I can speak to that too. As as we do our road projects, we have come to the policy that we implement now through engineering. That's probably only the last couple of years. We do bring everything up to standard now at all of our intersections, if it's adjacent to any of our road projects.
Right.
So we've added that to try to take some of that cost off on the annual basis or anything that DPW has to do. Luckily, we've been very successful at that, and those costs have been driven down because of the quantities. But yes, that tends to be the bigger cost. Matt probably can speak better towards, the sections in between, intersections, and there are a significant amount of those.
Right.
But we also take care of those in our road projects too. So we're trying to, do both through our road projects, which is taking away from us our ability to do more roads, but it's part of the corridor and part of the infrastructure. So we feel those need to be implemented there. But I think outside of our projects, because we get 1 million, we need about 2.5 to maintain our systems. So we need to find a way, and I think this is what Andrew's trying to get at, is this is a discussion point of how are we going to move forward in the future, not only funding, whether it's this year or not, but one policy, and then how do we fund that policy moving forward, and how do we maintain it? So I guess that's a discussion point.
That's the point I'm. Up on the assessments, we're gonna cover that. You should really think about much is being spent on city-owned sidewalks already that there is nobody is special assessed for, versus, you know, okay, now we're gonna take on for the homeowners instead of assessing them.
Yeah, and
You make that policy, now you gotta fund it. and
Yeah,
You may not wanna fund it.
And I maybe came off a little strong on my personal commentary on special assessments. Now, we weren't going to just begin reintroducing special assessments on our own because that's what the ordinance says. We want to just have that discussion with the common council. We may determine our needs are so great that we have to do some combination. And also, don't lose sight of the fact that this says sidewalks and trails. We've talked a lot about sidewalks, and trails are, you know, equally important for our network and things like that that we have, which is great. I mean, it's one of the huge amenities I think that's underappreciated by a lot of people in the community. And you know, it's part of our job to figure out how we maintain those assets. It's probably a combination of thought.
How residents perceive it and how they want to pay for things. Either way, it's going to come out of their pockets. You know, is it through the general property tax levy, which obviously need to be available, or is it through a one time every 20 years, you're going to ask me for another $2,000 in addition to what I pay annually in property taxes? And I think, at least in the communities I've been in more recently, my understanding is most residents feel this should be part of my property taxes. You take this amount from me every year. I maintain it for you for the course of my ownership of the property, but you're the one that put it in. Well, I guess really they put it in when it came with the price of the lot, but they look at it as a public asset and are never happy, and those hearings are never enjoyable. And really, the elected leadership needs to have the appetite to have those discussions, you know, when the room's full and people are going to come to you and let you know they don't have the money, even if it is over a 5-year period that they can make that payment. So it's a difficult decision, but it's kind of where and when do you want to take the money from them? And there are instances where it's not fair because your sidewalk or whatever may get used more than someone on a cul-de-sac, you know, or the cul-de-sac may not even have a sidewalk.
Yeah. Like,
Right.
Sometimes, sure.
We have one.
I think that's, you know, it's kind of different than the city of Milwaukee where everybody has a sidewalk.
They have an alley they get
Right.
special assessed for too, and they
Right,
get
you know,
the fix. So.
General assessment, great. I think, you know, I understand it. I mean, that's like saying, okay, my kids are out of school, I don't want to fund the schools anymore. Yes.
Great.
You know, it's just, I know that argument is out there, and people are gonna come in, they're gonna, you know, why should I pay my taxes for his sidewalk?
We see that on the water utility
Yeah.
side of it when someone requests a extension of a water main and you
Right.
don't necessarily need it or want it, and you're paying for it anyway.
Sidewalks are a difficult one because, like Matt just said, it's a discussion of general versus individual benefit, and sidewalks are of general benefit. I've seen Ken walk down my sidewalk on my side of the road. I know he doesn't have sidewalks in his subdivision.
Well, streetlights
He's
either.
never going to be assessed.
I suffer because we don't have streetlights. I have
And
to pay for the electricity.
And even a more practical example, I have sidewalks on my side of the road and my neighbors don't. On the other side of the
That was a
street.
cost saving to the developer because they were asked to be on both sides.
And who's gonna put up the
We're dealing with this, and it's kind of a really interesting conversation. You can also look at, I believe, I don't know how many people do it, but you can look at area assessments as well, as another option, not just the lineal footage, lineal feet. All right, I'll shut up.
The special assessments go the route of referendums from the current councils.
But funding this doesn't take out our ability to do a special
Right,
assessment.
and that's the only point I was trying to make was, based on his initial comment, it sounded like it was gonna be in or. And I was just warning against that funding won't cover that or if you do that.
The other factor, not to prolong this, the other factor is the administrative overhead and time to go through the statutory process for a special assessment. I haven't been in a community where we did those routinely, or I wasn't involved in those, but it's engineering design, notification, it's the public hearings themselves. It's a lot of work to get the money via special assessment. So we have to look at that too. Which you can also, some of those, that overhead you can fold into the assessment, but see where this goes.
Bottom line is we need to inform the public of what we are doing. Don't just let them find out later on.
All right. Where are we at? Are we done with
So the
it?
backside.
So we got
IT
through all the
and-
items that we wanted to discuss. I guess what I would suggest is maybe we go back to the top, and then anything that wasn't highlighted, we can go by department, division, office, have a conversation about it if you would like. If the manager's here, we can have them up and talk about it very briefly, but just so we're at. So I'll just take on community development because I don't see them here. The only other item not highlighted was another additional $30,000 for the Parks and Open Space Plan. We had $30,000 last year. That's what we're told is needed to complete it to satisfaction. That to turn over Matt, engineering. So the total project would be $60,000. There was $30,000 budgeted last year. They came back and said we need an additional $30,000 to complete it. So the total project cost would be $60,000.
Thanks, Max. So I have the 3 items that are non-highlighted. That's 13th Street reconstruction from Pewitz to Drexel. If you have any questions on that, that's just local cost share. So that's relocation of lights on We Energy poles or any other things, which would be adjustment of manholes and things throughout that project, which would be non-participating. Asking for 30,000 there. Liberty Avenue, the Pewitz Avenue intersection, Andrew touched on that prior. So what we're looking for there is 50,000, and that would accomplish real estate purchasing. There's 4 quadrants in that area that need to have some right-of-way purchased. That would allow us to purchase that prior to construction, which generally is a good thing. And then it would also allow utilities, if they needed to be relocated, that 1 year for relocation. So we're not pressing up against, running into utilities as we're reconstructing that roundabout.
Just a side note on that, the TID 11, which is the Drexel Town Square District, is actually the funding source for that. Within most of our tax increment districts, we are able to make expenditures within 1/2 mile of the boundary of those districts. And this is in there, just in there. So that's, it's nice to be able to use those sources of funds as opposed to, general taxpayer dollars here or cash on hand.
Thank you.
So the last one I have is the City Hall roof maintenance. So this one's a little more interesting for discussion. So we're trying to get out in front of retirements and the knowledge base that we're going to lose with retirement of Dick Kolka in the future here, which will probably be within the next few years. So one of the things we wanted to do is look at how we could, kind of maximize our ability to look at all of our infrastructure, and that be mainly buildings and maintenance of those buildings. And one of the largest things that we have to do is maintenance of our roofs. That's probably one of the larger costs is your shell. So we invited a company in here that does inspections. They put together the plans and the bidding process. They have contacts with contractors. They supply material, and then they do an inspection. So we were trying to look at a full funding group. We had them come out to City Hall to look at that. We thought with it being new and some of the issues that we've been facing in the last 5 years of it, infancy, I guess, of the building itself. So we just had them look over thinking that would be minor. They found a number of items throughout the building, whether that would be loose material on top. The major cost was on top of the clock tower. There is no ice, I don't know what you want to call them, ice spikes or whatever. Yeah, that's an easy term. So what that does, the ice spikes actually stop ice from falling off the metal seam roofs. One of the issues they saw is when that ice would fall, it's coming down 2 stories right on top of our roof system, which would then, there's potential for punctures into our roof system and leaking of water. So that was one of the items, and that is a major cost because obviously we have to get up on top there again. And then the other ones were just minor little repairs. So that's 40,000 is what they estimated the entire cost, including themselves, to help out. So yeah, any questions on that, I'd be more than happy to try to answer those.
The proverbial water leak into the reading room been fixed?
I think it's been managed. I'm not sure if it's been 100% fixed, but there is areas in the tower that do need repair that were identified.
Part of this process?
Yeah.
Is the reading room open, Andrew?
I believe so.
On the second floor?
Yeah. I see people in there.
Thank you.
Next up, fire department. Chief's here, wants to talk through the non-highlighted items.
Thank you. Our 4 items. First one, fire station furnishings, general replacement of furnishings at stations. All 3 stations for the mattresses, predominantly Station 1 and Station 3 for some of the furnishings. Station 3, a larger portion of that due to the administrative section and replacement of office equipment in that area. The portable radios, the addition of 4 portable radios to our inventory. Fire Station 3, interior painting, painting of the administrative area and some of the living portion of the station. A couple projects recently at Station 3, overall conditions a little bit shabby due to damage to the walls and ceilings, so this project will help kind of abate some of that. And then fitness equipment purchases. We came forward with a fitness equipment purchase last year. Each of our 3 stations maintains fitness facilities, and we we update the equipment as we notice age and maintenance concerns with it. This will provide some functionality at Station 1 and 2. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you.
Next, got IT. Tom, if you can come up and talk through your different items.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So for IT, we have several requests here. Our predominant one that we're really concerned about is our core network replacement. That's the most expensive request that we have for next year. That equipment was purchased when we moved into City Hall, so it's coming on 8 years now. It's typically a 7-year replacement on equipment. We push that equipment to about 10 years is what we try to aim for. However, we've expanded significantly over the last few years. Where that equipment is maxed out, we can't add anything more to us, so we're kind of limited on how much we can add on the networking side. And also in 2025, this equipment will no longer be supported by the vendor. So with that, we have no security updates, and this runs everything. So Wi-Fi, email, file servers. Anytime you click on anything on the computer, it goes through this piece of equipment. So we're trying to replace that as we have almost a year out on some of the network equipment that we've been purchasing recently. So if we purchase it January, we're hoping to have it by the end of the year, of next year. So,
Rest of this is standard stuff.
Yeah.
pretty standard, nothing wild. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to.
You don't feel
You're good.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you for coming.
Maintenance, I'll take this one on for Dick, that he's not here. I'm gonna start at the bottom, so you'll see one that says police station facility analysis. So, as you're probably well aware, the police station is 20 years old as of August of this year. And a 20-year-old facility usually needs a lot of maintenance, updates, rehab. And then we also know that north side of the facility has an envelope issue installation. That's part of the strategic plan to address it. But we thought it would probably be prudent to take a step back and have someone come in, evaluate all of the facility, whether that be the roof, the mechanicals, the building envelope, and then, you know, kind of give us a game plan as to how to fund these over, you know, is it 2 years, 5 years? You'll see there is projects to do some small items like the variable frequency drives and the chiller replacement. But generally speaking, on a facility, 20 to 25 years is when you got to replace like everything. So instead of us just planning for the envelope projects, our thought was let's do an analysis, figure out everything that needs to get done, because, you know, quite frankly, this is probably going to be a larger project in a year or two, maybe a data issuance, and, you know, we're having to replace things like roofs as well. So instead of just tackling the envelope issue here, let's look at it more comprehensively, see if there's some economies of scales to do just a larger rehab project of the facility. And then the other item I didn't really touch on was Civic Center server room UPS and AC installation. So server room up by IT doesn't have its own dedicated UPS power supply or AC unit. We do have a generator for the building, but we had some challenges. I think it was last summer, where we lost power there and the AC unit blew out. So we didn't have any AC in there for 2 months while we were waiting for a part. So we purchased like 3 or 4 temporary stand-up home AC units because, you know, the servers throw off tons of heat. So we can only keep that room to like 95 degrees even with these systems. So given how IT runs our world, as Tom mentioned with the core network, if that room were to go down, we would be doing nothing at the city from a network perspective. So working with Dick and Tom, thought is we should really get a separate uninterrupted power supply for the room and then have a separate AC unit that's connected to there, so that it gives us time in between when, if the power goes out, the UPS kicks on, and then gives us the ample time for the generator. So really just kind of a backup plan to make sure that our IT infrastructure doesn't go down. They're up. We have servers upstairs, and then
Civic Center, Bob.
Civic Center, this building. Sorry, not community center. And then we have servers over at PD as well. So there's redundancy. It's just more so. It's a building design issue, and it's one of those that, you know, as Tom alluded to, you know, our IT infrastructure and network has just, you know, exponentially grown in the since we moved in this building. So the amount of heat it's throwing off in there is causing issues as well. So it's really just kind of retrofitting it for kind of what's the new normal for our IT hardware needs. So, otherwise, that's really it for maintenance. I can have Chief Stacker come up if he wants to talk about the few police items. They look pretty standard to me.
Yeah, David, I think, I don't know, the only probably interesting item are the parking lot situation, given the dollar amount.
The parking lot?
Oh, that was, yeah.
Well, we can go back up to that if you want. That's not the full parking lot. That's just, I
That's,
believe, the front half of the facing to the public part of it. And there's a grant for that. That's covered with a grant. Okay, so from the police department, the other ones that we have are the taser equipment. We've had tasers for over 20 years. They have become a very vital part of our equipment and our tools, that being because they are a less than lethal option. It's a much safer option for us, and it's a much safer option for those that we come in contact with us that decide they want to fight with us. Less injuries for us, less injuries for them. So the bigger part is that with anything, Costs money to maintain, do all of our training, become certified, and keep them up to date. So the one thing that has happened with Taser International, which is now Axon, much like everyone else, is they want to go to some sort of subscription service, which is what's going to happen in about 4 to 5 years when our equipment's at end of life. Right now, we're looking at this $12,000 to $13,000 a year just to maintain all of our certifications, to replace batteries, replace cartridges, and everything else that's required for us to be able to carry these very valuable tools. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have specific to it, but that's kind of it in a nutshell.
How often on a taser do you think that they are deployed on a day or a shift or a
So
week?
that could be a tricky thing because sometimes just the threat of the use of it or the display of it is enough to get people to comply and go in. It's kind of like having a canine and they don't come out until they hear the dog bark and nobody wants to be bit by the dog.
Right.
So it's a very similar concept to that. So actual taser deployments, I'd say that we probably average at least one a month of actual deploying of the weapon.
All right, thank you. But you're displaying it frequently, but they're
Sometimes all you gotta do
intimidated
is
by it.
display, turn on the light, and explain that if you don't comply, we're gonna have to taser you, and that's enough to get people to go. If we have enough time and you have enough time to negotiate, sometimes we can take the cartridge off, display it as an arc fire, so they just hear the crackling of the electricity across the front of it.
Yeah.
That will get people to comply, and sometimes that doesn't work either.
Want the thrill.
Unfortunately, people make us do some very wild things instead of just going along with the program.
Thank you.
I was gonna say, we take volunteers if you want.
People, there's plenty of videos around people voluntarily getting blasted with a taser.
I heard Andrew's got one for the sidewalk.
Any other questions on the tasers?
No.
Okay.
It's just keep walking around.
The bigger thing that we have on here, and it's not really a big thing, but would be the drone equipment, FAA license, and the lifetime training that comes with it. This is really a combination of mainly the PD and the FD. We have a lot of items that we'd go to which would require, or having a drone would definitely make our jobs a lot quicker and easier, especially with how we have them set up with the infrared aspect. As you all know, Oak Creek is both a wooded area, a swampy area, and people do tend to go missing. People do tend to run from us. And sometimes, and most times, it's a lot easier if we can get a drone up to find out if they are or are not in there so that we can put our resources elsewhere, or as well as being able to take pictures overhead, whether that's a building that we're looking to go in and clear where we may have somebody up top inside for our tactical unit to be able to put a drone into a building instead of putting people in there first to see what's going on, and having that both video and picture aspect to be able to come out of here. IT is also added on here because we do believe that there'd be a very slim portion of this where IT would have a benefit to it when it comes to Wi-Fi connections, cameras, and or our radio equipment that are on top of buildings. We can easily send a drone up, take a look at it, and bring it back down instead of getting ladders out and having people go out, which is obviously much safer than putting any person on top of a building. So we do look at this as a combination between all three. And as far as ongoing costs, there are no IT-related ongoing costs. It would be anytime we have any of our pilots through attrition turnover, we would be on the hook at that point for I believe it's $150 a piece for them to take the test to become a certified pilot. With us having the lifetime training, we don't have to repay for the training. We would just be able to have them do that during their shift or make time for them to do that. Any of the other equipment that would come with it, because sometimes things do break on these, we would just have to replace those at that time, and that is a very nominal fee compared to replacing the whole unit.
Very good.
Any questions on drones?
Sounds good.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
All right. Well, I will fully admit these items aren't as electrifying or high flying as Chief Stecker's items are. They are still exciting and beneficial for Public Works. The first item that wasn't highlighted here is a front end loader replacement. What we're looking at here is, we had acquired a front end loader back in 2014, so it's not significantly old. However, not sure what the expected uses in that were at the time. However, it is a pretty undersized loader for what we would like to use it for. One of the biggest benefits would be to be able to use it in snow plowing operations, especially as we look to developing a roundabout in the future, but just as importantly, in clearing cul-de-sacs, not only the plowing operation, but the removal of the snow that we end up doing after larger events or after accumulation of several events, and for using it for options where you have a lot of bump-ins, bump-outs, whatever you want to call them, in the DTS area, where having a loader is with a wing is a lot more efficient and easier to operate in those layouts. The other thing would be it's a much larger box that we can use for when we're loading material, whether it be at the yard or if we're using it for stone or other materials. You can load trucks in that a lot quicker with the larger size box attached to it. Our other similarly sized heavy duty loader we use typically in the winter for loading salt into the dump truck. So that one's already kind of being used for that purpose. This would be nice in that we'd be able to use both loaders in the winter time, where one currently will use it. It's just not as extensively in the winter, so it would become a little bit more of an all year round option. The good side and bad side, I guess, is the undersized one is a 2014, so it's only going to be about 10 years old. However, we should also be able to recover a pretty good price for it when we go to the municipal auction and look at that. I was being conservative with the number of about 100,000. Hopefully, we would receive more than that, so that should reduce that overall impact for 2024's capital request.
So is the plan to sell the older one?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
So it's not to keep both, so we could deploy trucks quicker? Okay.
No, currently we have a 521 and a 721. What we would want to do is sell the 521, and then we would have two 721 size vehicles. Any questions with that? Otherwise, I can move on to the next item. This is for our patch truck replacement. This vehicle will be about 25 years old, so it certainly is experiencing a lot more issues that we're needing to repair major parts to. What we looked at is, opposed to going with another vehicle that we only use for part of the year, really this would take away a vehicle from our overall fleet. We would look at actually replacing it with an attachment for doing paving work. It would attach to one of our existing skid steers and actually do a lot neater, professional looking patches than what we're able to do currently with. It's probably not the oldest method of doing it currently with the truck that we have, but it is certainly an older process that you would use to do end of driveways. What this attachment would allow us to do is we could do stretches up to 6.5 feet, and you could also make several passes. We could do larger patches in the road, potentially even, if you have a main break or something, that would do a lot better job with it, a lot less hand work and just dumping it out from the vehicle itself. For potholes, we would be looking at, basically it's a skid unit that's loaded into one of our leased not stake bed trucks, but one of our larger, we call them small dump trucks. In Oconomowoc, they call them baby dumps for some reason, but I like small dumps better. But we load those skids into the small dump truck, and a nice thing about that is it makes it a lot quicker because it's built specifically for doing pothole patches, and it's pretty inexpensive that it's just a skid that's loaded. And also the nice thing about it is you're not climbing in and out of a big truck. You're going into a regular sized vehicle for the most part, so it's a lot easier in and out when you're continuously just going from location to location with potholes. You're not there for an extended period of time, so you can move a little faster. You could argue a less chance for injury just getting in and out of the vehicles. So that's what we'd be looking for, and then just a tarp, basically an automated tarp for over the top of one of our dump trucks, because that's what would be taking the material, the asphalt, to a location to do the larger patches that we would have with the skid steer. So and it would save us a significant amount of money. We're looking at $103,000 $100,000 compared to closer probably to $200,000 if we were to replace the 25-year-old truck that we have right now. Let's see. I think that was it on the first page. On page 2, we have a few items that would be related to our parks and replacement projects. The Johnstone Park pathway reconstruction, I believe I think it's at about 27 years old. There's significant cracking and things going on there. The larger issue probably is more of just the lack of drainage in a number of areas on that pathway that creates a lot of icing. We do clear that in the wintertime, so it is used year-round. So this would be looking at $75,000 would be for a full reconstruction that we could look at. You'd probably get, again, 25 to 30 years out of that. We also, talking with Matt Sullivan, could look at doing an overlay. That would be not quite, but about half the cost. So we're going to look at both of those options to get the true pricing on, I think. That might be closer to, let's say, $40,000. That's probably going to get you, I think, Matt had estimated maybe 10 to 12 years. So roughly half the life of a full reconstruct. Yeah, I think either way we would have to address the drainage issues.
I'll add to that too. We would probably put this on one of our annual road projects so we could include that and try to minimize our costs or capture those efficiencies on having larger quantities. That's what we've done in the past, and it's been pretty effective for us.
And then at Chapel Hills Park, it's probably the park we've received over the last 2.5 years approximately the most contact on from residents. And we have a few different options that we looked at where we would want to do, and we're looking at a future year for one of our other parks. But Chapel Hills seemed to be in the worst shape as far as our tennis courts and cracking, and also the fencing being older, and actually, with the pavement heat or the ground sinking down or the heaving up of the fence. We have basically chicken wire down for the last 6 to 8 inches so that the tennis balls aren't running out underneath there right now, but obviously those have been in existence for a while. Certainly we could continue to do crack sealing and just kind of preventative maintenance as we have been doing, and restriping, relining. And that's certainly an option. However, we have several other locations that down the line are going to deteriorate just as much too, and we figured it's probably a good time now to start looking at those and being a little bit more proactive on that and getting that taken care of. In addition, we would be looking at, is instead of having 2 tennis courts, we would look at having one of the tennis courts be converted into 2 pickleball courts. I'm sure everyone's aware that just continues to be a more popular sport for people of all ages, and we get requests continuously for pickleball courts within the community, and we've actually gone and put lines down just on some of our existing parks just to accommodate that, and not even having nets there. People bring their own nets and take advantage of it. So it's been successful, and it seems to, again, just keep increasing with demand for that.
So that's
for that
gonna have
activity.
One tennis court and then 2 pickleball courts
Correct. Yep.
at Chapel Hills?
Yes.
Okay.
And then since we're there, obviously, again, kind of to the economies of scale, and also the same age, the basketball court there too, we would look at redoing and repainting, and then getting some nicer backboards and hoops installed there that we've done on some of our more recent projects.
But being on parks, I've gotten probably the same amount of calls or complaints about this park. So I'm happy we're going to be able to put that on the docket for this year. Thank you.
Definitely. And then I think, looks like the last item we have, there's the log cabin that's located at the museum property that's essentially been kind of cared for by the Historical Society for several years. The city does own the property itself and the buildings. We've always kind of mowed and done some general maintenance as far as forestry goes, with tree pruning and any takedowns that are necessary. Recently, something that the volunteers had been doing was kind of maintaining weeds and those types of things around trees and the buildings themselves. But through our parks, we're kind of going through that and applying pesticides, on a subsequent just on a schedule to keep that in check. So that's hasn't been a big thing. But obviously, as the memo states, we have the log cabin that was gifted to the Historical Society and ultimately the city, I believe back in 1978. Probably one of the oldest buildings possibly in Milwaukee County. The Historical Society has been taking care of it for the last 40 plus years. But at least in the last 10 years, they've put a lot of effort into replacing logs as they've been able to and been able to locate them, done some of the treating to that structure as well as the other buildings within that property. But now they're looking at where it's become a little bit of a larger issue with some of those logs rotting, and I know they've got tarp over half the side of it for a big part of the year, just to protect it moving forward. So they actually went out and did look for about 20 different companies to come in and submit quotes for that work. They only received about, I think in the memo it said 3. They only received 2 back. One of which was certainly a more probably professional, long-standing company that would perform the work, and they outlined the different things that they would need to do. For about $60,000 was the estimate, on time and materials to take care of that.
So all that was done through the Historical Society? We didn't have any hand in that?
Not as far as receiving those quotes. We would need to receive those. We would want to go back out and get those.
I would agree.
Those bids or those quotes, requests for proposals on the work. Out here.
If you ask 10 people, probably different value judgments made about the structures themselves and the historical value and how the city's programming that or not programming that for educational purposes. We had a lot of conversations over the last few months with Mayor Dan and Ken and the team. And I think the interest level in these historic structures kind of waxes and wanes over time. And, we certainly don't want this council or this staff or administration to be the team that said, you know what, we don't place any value on this and they're not worth keeping up. We don't have a lot of historical reference points or heritage really in this community, considering we're long settled. But this one, we have to do something. There are assets. We do own the buildings. We do own the grounds. And I know the Historical Society has been maintaining that and curating the museum, if you will. But certainly they don't have the capability to do this type of restoration work. So that's kind of the idea. We can do better and more, I think, with the assets moving forward, but you don't get to have those conversations if you just let them continue to deteriorate until, they're deteriorated entirely. So that's kind of the thought process. It's kind of an interesting and odd proposal. We haven't had a lot of conversation over the years and putting these in our inventory of things to maintain. So it's before us now, and it's a good discussion point.
Well, this is just talking about the log cabin. What is the long-range plan for the rest of the buildings there? Because there's more than just this. I'm sorry.
No,
that's a loaded question.
It's a great question. I think it's a value judgment that needs to be made on prioritizing maintenance of those buildings or not. If you ask me, I think the city hall or the town hall is of more value and way cooler and interesting than the log cabin. And, the next person has the exact opposite opinion or places no value on it. Or there's value in them altogether and not individually. So it's a tough call. I just think that we arrived at the point that we don't want to foreclose on that history. At this point in time, we need to do something with the buildings. Otherwise we are kind of making the statement that we're going to let them continue to go until they're no longer. But we don't, answer your question pointedly, we don't have a plan for the rest of it. It's unique arrangement how we came about the property. They moved the buildings. Some of it's detailed in the staff report, and I don't know if I know all of the history. Of course, I don't on how all the relationships came to be and things, but this is kind of where we're at now. Maybe something for the full council to ponder at our budget workshop. I think that I just wanted to close, maybe, depending on the board's continued conversation or not, but if you look at the last items where you see on the second page, total 2024 CIP by funding source, you'll see that in some of these some of these reserve funds that we have, specifically the equipment replacement fund, the building reserve fund, and in this case this year, the bridge replacement fund, we have been able to have flexibility the last several years for the board here, as well as the common council, to address some of the capital needs of the departments because of these sinking funds. And how this will work, as it's worked, awesome the last few years, we prioritize when we look at how we end each fiscal year and the cash we have available from our operating budget, our positive budget variance. Hey, we only had this many costs and this many revenues. We're always money to the good at the end of the year, just with various items. Our main priorities when we look at administering our general fund balance policy are to replenish the building reserve fund and the equipment replacement fund back to $1 million. So while we're taking dips, right now they're funded at $1 million. You can see we're taking some pretty significant dips out of those two funds. We should get back to as close to that $1 million as our general fund budget variance allows. Similarly, the proceeds from, say, the front end loader replacement, the 100,000 conservatively that Matt estimated, can go back in and bolster that equipment replacement fund. So I don't want you to be alarmed that we're using cash such that, well, when will that cash be gone? That's not how it's worked here the last several budget cycles. We've been able to replenish that and have that to work with the following year. Now that could end. We could have a bad year or whatever the case may be, and it will make our budget conversations here a little more difficult to have. And we'll be saying no more, having to have a better, more precise priority conversation. But don't be alarmed that we're dipping into the cash because we have been able to replenish that each year for several years in a row now. Does that make sense?
In the big picture, Andrew, from my recollection, the only thing we actually altered from the recommendation is the 3 police vehicles, or 3 fire vehicles, sorry.
We added it, didn't we?
Yeah. And reallocated spending for fitness equipment.
Are we good?
Yeah, I'm good. We need a motion.
We
on
need
that,
a motion, yeah.
Gail will move to recommend the common council include various capital improvement plan items in the 2024 CFP budget as noted with the 2 amendments concerning fire vehicles and equipment, fitness equipment.
Roll call.
Gail, aye.
Marshall, I.
Guzikowski, aye.
Seifert, aye.
Alrighty. Number 8 is additional administrative and operations reports. Does anyone have any questions or comments? You have them in your packet, so I don't know if we need to talk about anything. Do you? No?
Oh, I'm good. Bob, you haven't seen the other stuff, but we have. But the stuff from the engineering that we typically see. Council sees that stuff at the end.
Okay, well, all right, so that's number 8. Then if you don't have anything else, we can make a motion to adjourn.
Marshall moves to adjourn.
Seifert seconds.
Roll call.
Gill, aye.
Marshall, aye.
Guzikowski, aye.
Seifert, aye.
Aye, aye.